You've waited long enough. The ultimate prize awaits. The craft of comics begins right now.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Craft of Comics. My name is Jacob. I'm here with James Asmus, who is a writer for Valiant. This is the Craft of Comics. This is the first installation of the 4-week series that we will be doing of workshops for comics. We're going to start off, of course, talking about the contest itself. So if you haven't already, you can pick up the Craft of Comics workbook that we have. You want to switch over?
Camera B.
The Craft We'll answer some of your questions at the end. But like I said, I'm here with James Asmus. He is from Valiant. He does a whole bunch of work for Valiant. But tell us a little bit about what you do in depth more.
Yeah, so I am a writer, and for Valiant, most of the work I've done has been for a title called Quantum and Woody. And it is also segued into doing a team-up book with another title mashed up together to be The Delinquents. I'm writing an upcoming arc of their big Avengers-y team-up of their A-list guys in a book called Unity.
Okay.
And developing a handful of other stuff with them, and I've written for Marvel and Image Comics. And
Cool.
Yeah.
So since we're here for the whole workshop, the Craft of Comics,
Right.
So tell us a little bit about what it is like to be a writer, or what it's like, let's go take it a step back, and the whole process on a comic actually becoming a comic.
Sure. Well, there's sort of two avenues would change a little bit differently. One is if you do an independent, a creator-owned comic, and that could be, if you're doing a web comic, if you're self-publishing, if you are, even doing something through a company like Image, that just kind of is an outlet for creators to do their own work. In those avenues, it really starts with the writer, maybe a collaboration between a writer and artist,
Right.
From a conceptual level. If you're going through kind of superhero universe companies, or even something like a Dark Horse that maybe has, Aliens and Predator or whatever those licenses are,
Yeah.
those usually start with the editorial team,
Okay.
and the editors kind of are picking what characters are going to get booked, who they're interested in hearing pitches and ideas for, and they may have certain things in mind they already know for the big picture of their universe of different characters
Right.
that they want. But even with that, they'll approach writers and ask, what ideas do you have for this character?
Okay.
And once you're in that position, it's kind of the same if you're doing a creator-owned or a work-for-hire, which is just, the business of writing is coming up with a meaningful story to tell that ideally blends the specifics of your characters into a particular storyline in a way that the storyline is unique by virtue of who these characters are, and the characters are developed and fleshed out and taken through surprising paces by the story. And my background originally was in acting, and that frames a lot of how I think about stories. So I usually think about the effects on the character and why this particular story is worth telling in terms of what they learn, what trials it puts them through,
Right.
what aspects of who they are this conflict brings out. And once you have that, comics has form in that, unlike, say, we're going to do a movie and maybe it's 90 minutes, maybe it's 2.5 hours, comics has a certain number of pages per issue, and that can be a little tyrannical or it can be really helpful. But then it's just about think about how to break up the structure of your story with those lengths in mind, and also with the cliffhangers in mind. Because it's if you want someone to come back next month to buy the next issue, or even if you're doing a webcomic, if you want them to have it hang in the back of their mind so they think to click back next week, whatever it is. Those kind of salient cliffhangers are super important. So you start breaking up your story to try and lean into those, have built up enough story that those twists happen in a good place and those intriguing questions happen. But yeah, you pace it all out for how much space you have to fill.
Cool.
And then break it down even further for your artist of panels and where your dialogue goes and all that. But usually you go through pitches just about the outline of the story, and then you'll get a chance to go forward and start moving into scripting.
And then that's when you start working with artists? Is that about that time?
Usually, in an ideal case, and this doesn't always happen in getting the comics out every month, but in an ideal case, you know who your artist is going to be, and when you're starting the scripting process, you'd be able to reach out and talk for your collaboration about what stuff do you want to draw, what stuff do you want to avoid, and if I know an artist's strengths, I can lean into them. If someone is really good at character expression, I'm going to capitalize on that with the choices I make in the script. Whereas if someone draws kind of more stoic characters, but their action is fantastic, I will lean into that because it's going to be the best final experience for the reader if you're really hitting the strengths and capitalizing on those moments.
Cool. And then, so what's the next step after that? So they go from the whole editorial into writing, and then to the artist. From there, what happens?
Well, you have sort of two steps, which is sometimes there's the penciler is the inker, which sort of finalizes the art, and sometimes it goes from a penciler to an inker. So that's a step that may or may not exist depending on who you're working with. Colors and lettering often happen simultaneously on separate tracks because they're just, once the art is in place, they're kind of dealing with fleshing it out in different ways, and then you can merge those two. So usually the colorist is determining the palette, the mood of the book. They're kind of changing, they're putting finishing touches on really achieving the reality of the visual art. Usually the artist is giving the most notes, the artist and the editor. I don't always see the colors as they're coming in. Sometimes some editors want me to weigh in case I notice whoa, this has tonally taken on something that is counterproductive to what we're trying to do in the story. But most of the time the artist and the editor can handle any of those notes, and it's more on my plate to work with communicating with the letterer. I'll usually see a lettering draft and have an opportunity, once that's been done, to do a revision based on the lettering. And sometimes it's true, you'll write something and your artist does it so well that you can take out half of the exposition. Someone doesn't have to tell you they're heartbroken if they look
like they're
beautifully heartbroken.
Cool.
You know what I mean? And, and there's other times where the artist may have just, the way it plays out on the page, we lose track of something and you need to put in clarifying lines of what's happening in the plot, or if the emotion isn't there, you might have to make up for it in rewriting some of the dialogue. There's also times when you just realize there's not enough space. If you're like me and you write too many words, there's just not enough space. You're cramping the art, you're killing the moment a little, and you just want to edit yourself a little to let things breathe or flow a little bit better. There's also times that I just realize the pacing is off, and I want to move this line to this space and do whatever. So I'm usually working with the letterer on revisions, and then the editor is packaging it all together and make sure all the proper updated versions of everything are being merged together, and we take one last look through, and then it goes out for printing or digital release, depending on whatever.
So what is the timeline for that usually?
Oh, several months. I would say by the time I start writing is probably 4 months before the book is out, and it's probably about a month for printing, turnaround, shipping. Yeah, 3 weeks.
Okay.
So I take a little bit longer than some writers, but if I'm taking 2 weeks to write a script, particularly for something like Quantum and Woody, where I'm trying to get humor right, that's a little bit more fine tuning, and you want to think on it and not just put the first thing that comes to mind, but the best surprising thing. So if I take 2 weeks, the artist usually doing line art takes about a month to do an issue. That's why you'll see a writer maybe writing 2, 3, 4 comics a month, but an artist is usually just doing one book. And sometimes they could take 5, 6 weeks, and that's a professional artist. If you're looking to start your own comic, if your artist has a day job, they will take longer than that. You know, I did a creator-owned comic for Image, and our artist had a day job, and it took him about 2 years to do 110 pages.
Oh, wow.
Because he had to do it in between his other gigs. But that's always really important to know if you want to get into a making comics venture with someone, like get a realistic understanding of their timetable. But a colorist, there's probably a lot of variation on that. I feel like a week or two a colorist. That's I'm looking over to another gentleman who works for Valiant on some of these things I'm a little clueless on. And a letterer, fast professional letterers can usually do an entire issue in 4 days, 5 days.
Oh, nice.
Okay. My books may be a little bit longer because, again,
all the words.
Yeah, too many words.
All the words.
So the whole thing, and some of these things happen concurrently with each other. And, and some, some people can't start until something else is done. So.
Cool. So we watched the panel a couple of hours ago on the 25 years of Valiant, and you mentioned tonal complexity.
Yes.
For writing.
Yeah, there's certainly no shortage of things that are just comedies or are just bleak revenge stories, but I am a big fan of tonal complexity, and I believe that comedies are made more meaningful and we laugh harder when we really know the characters. And to do that, we have to really feel for their wants. We have to feel for their longings and their defeats. And the whole thing, 85% of your efforts can be towards serving one dominant tone. An action can be brutal 85% of the time. But it's like eating one type of food, one flavor. Like, you lose track of its own value if you don't have something to compare it to. And so I think finding those moments to pull aside and give us a counterpoint of love, of heartbreak, of weird idiosyncratic humor, I think all of those things make the whole thing richer, and they recalibrate you while you're in the middle of a story so that you're not just hearing white noise of a certain emotion, or if it's just tension the whole time, you need a counterpoint to that, or you just exhaust the audience.
Gotcha. So speaking of counterpoints, I don't know a lot about Quantum and Woody, but I do know that there is a goat.
Yes, yeah.
So if you want to talk about Quantum and Woody, so that way I can maybe understand the goat a little bit more.
So Quantum and Woody, the simplest thing is to say that it is like a buddy cop movie with superpowers in terms of its basic functional dynamic. But beyond that, the story is about two estranged foster brothers, and they haven't talked to each other for years. They never quite got along. And then when the man who raised them dies, they try to solve his mysterious murder, even though they are in no way qualified to be investigating. And in the course of that, an accident gives them superpowers, but it also changes the powers change their bodies, where they have to clang these bracelets together once every 24 hours, or their bodies disassemble into atoms. So essentially, they have to at least sort of stay together in their life, or they'll die. And in that sense, it becomes, to me, a metaphor about family, which is like, even if these people drive you crazy, they're so important to who you are and to your well-being. And they can be the people who absolutely drive you nuts more than anyone, but that ultimately are better for you than anyone. And the goat comes in at the end of the first trade. The goat was a key part of the 90s run of Quantum and Woody, created by Christopher Priest and Doc Bright. And I really changed who the goat is in this series, and we start to tease that out. You really find out in the third volume of Quantum and Woody. We kind of play it for a mystery, but the goat has superpowers as a result of experiments from the same mad scientists that are sort of involved with this mystery. Which is, the
great.
villains in the first arc are Edison's radical acquisitions, and the gist of it is that Thomas Edison, in real life, would strong-arm a bunch of other inventors and basically like buy them out or kind of take over their inventions. He has more patents under his name than anyone, but it was largely like 80% of those were kind of stolen, or like he sort of paid for the research but then put his name on it.
Gotcha.
And so this furthers that idea and says that even after his death, he had a group of people who went around and essentially like absconded with scientific advancement and sort of strong-armed it to keep it, and then they control the release of technological advancements to maximize the profitability. So it's sort of like, we've had flying cars for 80 years, but we didn't make enough money off of like the old model yet. So it's that sort of gist. And different titles in Valiant, a lot of them tap into different genres or kind of subgenres or whatever. And for me, when I was starting to do Quantum and Woody, their origin that I wanted to preserve from the original was kind of in mad science.
Okay.
And Valiant hadn't had their like mad scientist subgenre really built out, so I decided to make that kind of the general thrust of Quantum and Woody's world and the threats they come up against and kind of the stuff we play with. So the goat is a result of mad science and a lot more. He ends up, we kind of reveal some surprising emotional complexity to the goat as well.
So were you a fan of Quantum and Woody before you picked it up?
Yes, and in fact, when Valiant first called me and asked me if I wanted to pitch something for their line, I was like, I missed so much of Valiant when it first came out in the late 90s, because it was the end of high school, beginning of college for me, when I had no money to go buy comics, or I was spending it on girls. Not like buying girls, but like buying things for girls that were
everybody understood.
Girlfriends.
Totally.
Okay, great. But anyway, so Quantum and Woody was one that when I got back into reading comics, once I had a job and income, a shop I had been going to, I was just asking what I missed out on that would fit in with the stuff I liked. And it was recommended to me, and I loved it, but I couldn't find all of them. So when I found out they wanted me to pitch on Quantum and Woody, I was thrilled, because I was like, oh, that's my sensibility, 100%. But also I was like, oh, at the very least, they're going to send me PDFs of all the issues I didn't have. So even if they don't take my pitch, I'm really winning on this one. But yeah, I built out, I just kind of had a vision quest of what I would do with the series for a couple days and pitched that, and they said yes, and it's almost unchanged from my original pitch, like what's been happening in the series for the 4 volumes. And
awesome.
The crossover with Archer and Armstrong was a pleasant surprise. So I found that together with the writer of Archer and Armstrong, Fred Van Lente. And Archer and Armstrong is a conspiracy theory busting quest of 2 guys, and it's another kind of odd couple book. So we kind of blended their conspiracy theory with our insanity, mad science, and kind of crafted a plot that blends them both.
So since we're still trying to build on Valiant, you keep talking about Valiant back in the 90s.
Yeah.
So what has happened since the 90s with
Well,
Valiant?
so they got bought out by a video game company called Acclaim that then kind of went burst, and a guy named Dinesh Shamdasani loved those characters and ultimately became a business creative man, and got together with some people to buy the Valiant IP out of bankruptcy away from Acclaim, and lovingly nurtured it back to a place where they could relaunch. So the book started coming out in 2012, but he had been working on it for years before that. And all the stuff, if you start reading with the new Valiant, that's all you need to know. You don't have to have read the 90s stuff. It's not a part of the continuity that we're dealing with now. So all of the books we do now are their own starting points.
I remember y'all talking about that in the panel.
Yeah.
No matter where you start, no matter which one you pick up on.
Any book's volume 1 is designed like, if that's all you read, you would get a full story. The volumes keep going forward, collections of a few issues at a time. And you'll see elements of other parts of the Valiant universe coming into it. They have a voodoo character, Shadow Man, and I utilize some of that world in the second or third arc of Quantum and Woody. like I said, we cross over with Archer and Armstrong. But it's always built where we introduce what you need to know. It's very much new reader friendly. And I've always tried to write this way, but I sort of feel like you're doing your audience a disservice. It's not really thanking them for their time and their $10 if you are giving them a story that, like so many 90s comics, burnt people out because it would like put a little asterisk in a box, and it's like, to understand this plot point, go buy these 5 other books. And it's like,
right.
I don't like those characters. I don't want to. I have only so much money.
Just down the web.
Yeah, and instead Valiant just kind of cultivates all of these individual characters and storylines, and if you start reading across different titles, you'll get a bigger, richer picture of all of it. But it's really built to be like, hey, read what you like.
Okay.
But they work really hard with great people on making really good stories, and I've never felt more, I've worked for a lot of different publishers and in other fields of writing, but they really work so hard to guarantee that by the time the book comes out, it's something worth everyone's time. There's a lot of love and passion for these characters, from the CEO through the editors, you know what I mean? Like, just to everyone touching the books. And we're given a lot of freedom to imbue our interests and our voices into the book. So they all do have very different flavors. So I think there kind of is something for everyone in the Valiant universe. And by us being given that kind of ownership that you would usually get with a creator-owned book, our passion, I think, comes through in the work. And you really see it with a much richer, more distinct takes in all of the characters.
Cool. So I know you were talking earlier when we sat down about how the workbook has the different panels in it.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about how people can take advantage of the different panel pages.
Yeah, so I think both of your, well, first off, if you're an artist, I've seen a lot of starting artists not employ enough variety. Like when people have shown me their pages at shows that they're kind of shopping their portfolios around, you see a lot of people sticking with what they're comfortable with. And I think varying up your panel layouts and doing a 6-panel page, a tall panel on the side and short ones over here, like, it just breaks up your visual narrative. It keeps it feeling dynamic, but also they each serve a different purpose. You know what I mean? And giving something a lot of space, if it's not the right moment to spread out, it doesn't help you. Variety for variety's sake, it should all serve story and rhythm and character and emotion. But basically, I think these are great for writers because in a comic script, unlike in just a screenplay or certainly a novel or anything, in a comic script you should be calling out, like, there's 5 panels on this page. This is what we're seeing in the first panel. And just as a little tip, it's always an individual character can only accomplish one motion or one action in a panel. And I know that sounds silly or self-evident, but even 5 years into it, I still find myself being like, he's catching this thing and throwing it back at a guy, and then I have to be like, well, okay, but what moment are we watching now? Because if we never saw him catch it, it would seem crazy if he's throwing it, and suddenly, does this guy carry grenades as well? So you need to be aware of earning all your visual information piece by piece. But if you start really breaking it down, it's really important to remember, once I say there's 6 panels on a page, this is how big they're going to be. You know what I mean? And maybe there's different configurations of space, but it's good to be aware of how small some moments are going to have to be. And as a writer, you can call it, and you could say, small detail panel, close up on this thing. Okay. And then you could say, big panel, throws a guy through a wall, whatever it is.
Right.
As you can see, real nuanced character, emotional storytelling in my examples. But and be prepared for your artist to change that. I write that kind of detailed script, but in Delinquents, Kano is a brilliant artist, and he started adding panels and breaking things up his own way, but he's a master storyteller, so I don't mind at all. There's a thing where this guy's immortal, so he got impaled and then just pulls it out. And he added this little detail shot of looking through the hole and seeing a guy fainting. That's brilliant. You know what I mean? So I'm thrilled to have that. But also, if you have a collaborator who wants to embellish and add things and whatever, then you should probably err on the side of leaving them more space in your script, so
Gotcha.
that, because if you already have 9 panels in your script page and then they want to add stuff, there's either no room or you're going to start stepping on your own toes. So just being aware of those kind of tastes in everyone who's working on the book. And I've had some artists say, like, no, I want you to lay out exactly the images you want and the story you want to tell, and I want to execute what you have in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had other people who are like, don't even call out the shots, like, write what's going to happen and I'll break it up and I'll paste it out. And if you're working with someone who's really knows what they're doing, then that's thrilling. Like, I love that. I just care about a good final product, and if I have good collaborators, I'm happy to give them the ball to run with for a while.
Awesome. So we have some other Valiant issues here.
Yes.
Do you want to touch any of these? I know you were talking about Unity a second ago.
Yeah, so Unity, I'm writing issues 23 through 25 of Unity, and this is the one I was saying is kind of, in a gross oversimplification, it's their Avengers. It's their, like, a lot of their leading characters. Exo Man of War was the character that led the relaunch of the modern Valiant. And that's basically like, what if a Visigoth got Iron Man's armor and ended up in the modern day wearing like an ultimate weapon, but has kind of ancient warrior mentality. Eternal Warrior is literally an undying master warrior assassin who has lived through all the ages, all the wars.
Oh, wow.
In protecting sort of the spirit of the earth. The Geomancer is a title passed on from person to person, and they essentially, he has to protect the speaker for the earth. Ninjak is a British ninja.
Oh, yeah.
Secret spy. Yeah. He works for MI6, British Secret Intelligence, and is a ninja. Sexy, badass action ensues. Bad butt, sorry. What? And then these characters are from Harbinger, which is one of the other series that launched the modern Valiant, and it is a very grounded teenage kids with different variations on like psychic, telepathic powers. Really character-driven, really honestly young and interesting, and kind of has a rebel aesthetic with real-world consequences to it.
Okay.
I think it's a beautiful, beautiful book. I love Harbinger. And this is actually kind of people who are introduced as villains in that context, taken on this team of heroes. And that's actually another thing I think really sets the Valiant universe apart from a lot of other superhero things, is all of their characters, all of their universe is really cast in a moral complexity that I think acknowledges shades of gray in especially high stakes things. I think anyone who honestly studies politics or history would acknowledge, like, it's very rare you can come up with like a pure, noble, massive action. You know what I mean? Like, if in a war, there are inevitably people on both sides of the conflict who just care about the health and well-being of their families.
Right.
You know what I mean? And you can have people who are drunk with power doing terrible things, but if you go and bomb their country, there's innocent people somewhere in there. You know what I mean? And so I think this is a world that is cast in different versions of that.
Okay.
And I think there's time, it's built in ways where sometimes you're cheering for the dictator, and sometimes you're cheering for, you know, a warrior soldier, and sometimes you're, you know, cheering for a couple idiots kind of destroying things when, you know, they think they're being superheroes. And it's an interesting place where a lot of times in Valiant, people who are introduced as villains become heroes of other stories. And I think it's, for me, as someone who read comics for 20 years, it feels truer and more relevant to me as an adult looking at the world. It resonates more with what I understand to be like real life, while still being fun and escapist and beautifully imaginative scenarios that are exciting and fun. It also, it just kind of has a feeling of reality or relevance that I think escapes things that just want to be like, good guy, bad guy. You know. Those are fun too. I watch those with my son, but I feel like if I'm then going and writing and reading something that feels like it has that cut and dry thing, it feels a little dishonest.
Okay. Cool. So another thing I learned today, and I thought this was really, really cool, especially for you guys out there. Valiant does gold variants. Is that correct? Is it right? So they're basically the same cover, but the outline. Am I correct?
The title is gold. Like the title treatment gets kind of gold embossed.
And it's really cool because they give them to people who show up to the booths or do like special things like answer questions at panels. And they're really cool. Where are some other really great places that you've given these, or
they're particular to conventions, I think, especially where people show up cosplaying as Valiant characters, or even they're just rocking Valiant shirts of our characters, like just places where you see they're out promoting the material. We've definitely done this for people who we know have gone out and like done something to just get other people hooked on Valiant. People who are working as our ambassadors. The easiest way to get it is at shows when you come to Valiant panels at conventions where we, any of the regular kind of con panels where we're talking about what's up and what's coming up in Valiant or the history of Valiant or whatever. At the end of our panels, they usually give a code word that then you can go to the booth and say that code word, and we give out the gold variant covers. And those are not things that go to retail shops or that you buy online or whatever. They're super rare, big thank you presents to people who are, supporting the company and really making themselves a part of it.
Yeah, so definitely look out for those, or if you're near a con that Valiant's going to be at, go check them out, support them.
Come to a panel and you'll get something out of it,
right,
aside from just, the fun and entertainment.
So what's coming up for Valiant, for you and for Valiant? What's in the works? What's stuff you can talk about?
Yeah, those are two different things. The big thing this summer, the big event, is called the Book of Death, and it kind of has it's a very contained miniseries that has a macro vision for the whole Valiant universe as it stands right now, and potentially a threat of undoing it all, with one of the best villains Valiant then or now has ever created, of Master Dark, who is sort of this voodoo practitioner who has ascended to kind of demigod-like power, and he had been cast into the dead side between life and death, and is kind of coming back with a vengeance. And it is as much as that sounds like a big sprawling epic, unlike a lot of kind of event comics, it's a beautiful character piece about Eternal Warrior, who I talked about in Unity, and exploring more about the history of the Geomancers, the people he takes care of. But it's high stakes, beautiful storytelling, has huge consequences for the universe. It's a 4-issue miniseries with a couple individual tie-ins that really illuminate the central concepts of some of the other characters. So there will be a single issue that's like Book of Death, Fall of Harbinger, and it really cuts to the core of what the conflict and the essence of that title is, and some of the most important characters. Fall of Bloodshot, and so that's one of those things that Valiant really tries to keep things contained. You could just read Book of Death. You could pick up these other ones and then get an amazing introduction to the world of Valiant by just picking up a couple things.
Slightly interesting.
Yeah. I am working on, like I said, Unity 23, 24, 25. 23 and 24 are leading up to the capper of this first era of their Unity super team, where some loose threads from the event 2 summers ago was Armor Hunters, 1 summer, 2, 1. Last year's big event was Armor Hunters, where Exo Man of War, who kicked off the universe, had you discover that there's several of these armors, and there's a bigger intergalactic federation of survivors who have all been wiped out by these armors, essentially as a plague throughout the universe, band together to hunt down and destroy these armors. And they come to Earth essentially to quarantine and destroy as much of Earth as has come in contact with his armor. It's a big, crazy epic. And again, you could just read Armor Hunters, or you could read that and the Exo Armor Hunter tie-in, issues, or you could have just kept reading Exo and you would get the story. It's balanced out in a really smart way. But anyway, there's some loose threads to that Unity was a part of that comes back and cuts to the core of the team and deals with the kind of latent conflicts that have been there for a while, and we kind of explode the team to see whether or not it can come back together or not. It literally might not. And 25 is, for the Valiant titles, when they hit 25, they do something different. They do like anthology issues, so they're longer with a bunch of short stories that kind of look at the characters from different angles than the series has up until that point. There's usually a front story that's a little bit longer by the ongoing writer of the book that's kind of tied into the progressive story. And then there's these other pieces by different people, often with kind of more outsider independent comics takes, or sometimes just people that Valiant really likes and they want to, they've been looking on something to work together with. And this time, Unity 25 is going to be an all humor issue. So I will say you could pick up Unity 25 and not have read any of the series, and you would just enjoy yourself. It's some of the best humor minds who work in comics, writers from The Daily Show and Late Night with Stephen Colbert and The Nightly Show, as well as people like me and other people who who usually work in comics. But it's going to be a comedy-centric, I think, double-size issue for Unity 25.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's going to be a silly playground.
Cool. So I think we're about to go into the Twitter Q&A.
Great.
So if there's anything that you want to ask the people that they can maybe send in their answers.
That I want to ask them to ask me?
Right now. But we're about to pull them, so if you have your...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, tweet any kinds of questions. If it's about craft, if it's about the nature of writing, if it's about writing for comics, if it's about finding artists, if it's about my favorite snacks that you want to send me.
Any question, we'll try to answer. We'll try. So we have Dan Moeller, who asked, any teases on what your Unity arc will be like?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about it, but I will say maybe more specifically, if you've been following Unity, a spoiler, semi-spoiler, coming out of Armor Hunters, one of the Armor Hunters ends up on Unity as part of the team. And I will say the conflict is they might not have actually have given their loyalty to Unity over the Armor Hunters. And that person might be leading a suicide mission to destroy them all. And that will kind of make the team realize they don't really know and necessarily trust each other, because they all came into it with their own vendettas and missions. So it kind of blows up the team into pieces and questions if they really trust each other anymore to go forward.
Cool. So Dan also asked, so thank you, Dan, for the questions. What's your favorite Valiant character and why?
I've spent so much time with Quantum and Woody that I feel like, and in particular, Woody is such an exercise of my id. He's such a poor impulse control person. It's not who I am at all, but it's really cathartic to like tap into what someone with no filter would do. So I've spent the most time with him, and thus he probably means the most to me. But in terms of a character I love that I would just love to tackle, I'm actually totally fascinated by Shadow Man, who is their sort of voodoo sorcerer character, who kind of inherited it and did not necessarily know it or earn it or know how to control it. And I think that whole mythos is something I would love to dig into and play with a lot more.
Cool. So we haven't gotten a lot of questions yet.
Okay.
But I would like to give a shout out to Amy Mystery and the Kyle Souza for sending in some great pictures and interacting with us on Twitter.
Oh yeah, I see they've got you're in the stores. Thank you guys.
Yeah. Look at this too. Look, there's us.
Oh, that's
so we
crazy.
can see it too. But I think we're going to cut it here.
Okay.
I just want to touch base again on the Craft of Comics workbook. Make sure you go home with yours today. Come back and see us next week we are going to be sitting down with Clayton Henry.
Awesome.
Yeah. So we'll be sitting down next week, next Saturday at 5 p.m. Eastern, 4 Central, 3 Mountain, 2 Pacific. So be sure to check us out next week for any updates or anything. Check us out on Facebook. Follow Valiant for all their updates. Follow James. So, yeah. Do you handle?
Yeah, Twitter is just at James Asmus. That's the best. I'm most active there.
Cool. And then don't forget to check out the contest, the ultimate prize to be published in a Valiant comic book, potentially. So be sure to check out the official contest entry form, and then the website www.gohastings.com/Valiant. But I think that's all we're going to do today. If you guys have any other questions for next week for Clayton, go ahead and start sending them in. We'll start looking at them, and then we'll go from there. Cool. All right. Thank you, James.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.